The most dangerous person in any room is the one who says nothing, who simply watches, who doesn't react. They don't raise their voice, they don't flinch when provoked. They don't need to prove they're powerful, because they already are, and everyone feels it. We're used to thinking that strength means noise, shouting, arguing, posturing. But what we rarely realize is that the most terrifying kind of power is quiet, because when a man doesn't react, when he doesn't explain, doesn't defend, doesn't play your game, you can't read him, you can't predict him, and that makes him dangerous. You see, we fear what we don't understand. We fear what we can't control. And a person who doesn't show his cards, who doesn't try to win you over, he doesn't just make you curious, he makes you anxious. He becomes a question that keeps you up at night. That's the man people fear, not because he's violent, not because he's loud, but because no one really knows what he's capable of. And here's the part no one tells you. That kind of presence, that kind of composure, that power, it's not genetic, it's not gifted, it's trained, it's built, one decision at a time. And its blueprint has existed for over 2,000 years. It's called Stoicism. Stoicism has been misunderstood for centuries. Most people think it's about suppressing emotions, pretending not to care, or being cold and passive. But that's not Stoicism, that's avoidance. Real Stoicism is active, it's strategic, it's a psychological weapon. Because the man who can control his inner world, who doesn't rise to provocation, who keeps his vision clear and his emotions disciplined, that man becomes unshakable. He becomes unreadable. And the moment people realize they can't manipulate him, they start to fear him. This isn't about being emotionless. This is about being emotionally sovereign, so that no one, no rival, no enemy, no situation can ever pull you off center. This is how you take back control. This is how you become the kind of man others instinctively respect or fear without ever raising your voice. Because you don't have to speak to make a statement. Sometimes the silence is the statement. In this video, we're not just going to talk about Stoicism. We're going to weaponize it. We're going to show you how to use ancient principles of self-mastery to develop the kind of silent, commanding presence that stops people in their tracks. You'll learn why silence creates fear, and how to use it with precision, how to master your reactions so no one ever has power over you again, how to project dominance without aggression, what the greatest Stoic warriors and tacticians in history did to become untouchable, and how to build a daily code of conduct that reshapes how people perceive you. Because this isn't about theory. This is about building your personal edge, a presence that speaks louder than any threat ever could. But I want to warn you, this isn't going to be easy. It's going to require discipline, reflection, and above all, restraint. You'll have to unlearn everything society has taught you about power and replace it with something far more real. But if you're ready to walk that path, if you're ready to become the kind of man who doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard, then stay with me. And if you're serious about becoming stronger, not louder but stronger, then hit the subscribe button, because this isn't just a video, this is a system, and it begins now. There's something deeply unsettling about a person who gives you nothing. No reaction, no expression, no hint at what they're thinking. Because the human brain craves certainty. It needs patterns, labels, reasons. We want to know. Are they friend or foe? Are they with me or against me? But what happens when someone refuses to give you that clarity? What happens when someone looks at you with calm eyes and says absolutely nothing? Most people interpret silence as weakness, as if the louder voice wins. But in truth, silence is ambiguity, and ambiguity creates unease. When someone isn't yelling or defending themselves, your mind starts working overtime. What are they thinking? Why aren't they reacting? What do they know that I don't? That anxiety, the constant scanning for signals, that's fear in disguise. And it's exactly what Marcus Aurelius understood. They say Marcus was betrayed more than once, even by his own generals, even by his own son. But he didn't rage, he didn't retaliate impulsively, he didn't storm through the halls of power like a wounded emperor. He simply noted it, he observed, he processed, and he responded with deliberate calm, because he understood something most leaders, even today, never learn. That the moment you react emotionally, you give your enemy a map to your mind. But if you stay still, if you give them nothing, they're left swinging in the dark. And in that darkness you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. Now let's get scientific for a moment. Every person you encounter is subconsciously scanning you for emotional signals. This is called limbic resonance. Your nervous system is wired to mirror others. It's why laughter spreads, why anger is contagious, why you can feel tension in a room before a word is spoken. We're social creatures. We look for clues, micro-expressions, tone of voice, posture, to know how to act, to know if we're safe, to know what the rules are. But when someone breaks that pattern, when someone remains emotionally neutral, your brain starts to panic. Because now it doesn't know what to expect. There's no script, no cues to follow, no signs of submission or aggression, just stillness. And the moment your enemy sees that stillness, the moment they realize you're not giving them anything, they feel it, not consciously at first, but in their body, in the slight quickening of their breath, in the discomfort of not knowing what you'll do next. This isn't philosophy anymore. This is biology. Think of it like a chess match. Your opponent makes a bold move, expecting you to panic. They wait, watch, ready for your flinch. But you don't move, you don't speak, you don't blink. Suddenly they start second-guessing everything. Did I make a mistake? Why isn't he reacting? What does he see that I don't? Their fear doesn't come from your words, it comes from the vacuum you create. Because when someone has no emotional grip on you, they realize something terrifying. They don't control the game anymore. Now let's talk about the foundation of all this. Detachment. Most people think detachment means you don't care, that you're cold, that you've shut yourself off from the world. But the Stoics taught something much more dangerous. Detachment is not disinterest, it's discipline. It's the decision to feel something deeply, but not let it control you. The Stoic doesn't suppress emotion, he masters it, because the second someone can anger you, the second they can offend you, insult you, rattle you, they own you. That's why Epictetus said, "He who angers you controls you." Because it's not about the insult, it's about your reaction to it. And if they can provoke a reaction, they know where your weak points are. But if they can't, if you show no tension, no rush to defend yourself, no flinch, then they realize they're swinging at a ghost. A detachment isn't numbness. It's choosing your battles. It's seeing chaos and choosing stillness. That stillness over time becomes presence, and that presence becomes gravity, the kind of gravity that people orbit around, or fear, because nothing is more threatening to someone who needs your reaction than your refusal to give it. So remember this, the more noise your enemy makes, the more desperate they are to see you break. Let them shout, let them provoke, let them throw every emotional hook they have. You do nothing. You observe, you reflect, you wait, because in the silence, they will hear their own weakness echo back at them, and they will know you are not the one being moved, you are the one holding the line. We live in a world of reaction. Someone insults you, you fire back. Someone challenges you, you rise. Someone tries to humiliate you, you scramble to restore your pride. It's an endless game of stimulus and response. Push, pull, attack, defend. Like animals, dancing to instincts we don't even question. But the Stoic, he doesn't dance, he doesn't rush to react, he waits. And in that wait, he does something powerful, he chooses. He doesn't react, he responds. You see, Reacting is easy, it's reflex, it's immediate, it's usually emotional, but true response, is deliberate. And deliberate action is rare, which is why it stands out. That pause between what happens and what you do next is where Stoic power lives. Seneca understood this better than most. He lived under one of the most volatile emperors in Roman history, Nero, and for years he walked a line between service and self-preservation. He knew he was being watched. He knew his life could be ended with a whisper. And when the time finally came, when Nero sent assassins to force Seneca to take his own life, Seneca didn't panic. He didn't beg. He didn't plead. He didn't try to escape his fate. He accepted it with composure. He washed his hands. He calmly spoke to his friends. He opened his veins in the bath, as they had ordered, and as his blood drained, he continued to speak, clearly, without fear. His final act wasn't one of submission, it was domination, of the only thing that truly mattered, his inner world. Because when you show the world that you are not afraid, not even of death, you become something that cannot be manipulated. You become untouchable. But Stoic control isn't just about what you don't do, it's about what you don't reveal. We live in an age of oversharing. People broadcast their fears, their dreams, their every emotion. But there's a reason ancient warriors, emperors, and tacticians concealed their hearts like fortresses. Because when people don't know what moves you, they don't know how to move you. The less you share, the more power you hold. Don't share your fears, don't share your joys, don't tell the world what you want. Because the second you do, someone will try to use it against you. Keep your emotional economy tight, efficient, disciplined. When you walk into a room, people should feel something, but they should never be quite sure what. Your silence should raise questions. Your lack of reaction should create tension, not because you're trying to be mysterious, but because your mouth's self-control speaks louder than words ever could. Think about it. Have you ever met someone who doesn't laugh at the joke everyone else is laughing at? Who doesn't flinch when insulted? Who doesn't jump into the chaos of gossip, outrage, or bragging? That person sticks in your mind because you're not sure how to classify them. You don't know where they stand. And so, you watch, you touch, watch them. And just like that, they've taken your attention, without asking for it, without saying a word. Now we go deeper, into one of the most difficult but powerful forms of Stoic discipline, withholding. You don't owe people your thoughts. You don't owe them your feelings. You don't even owe them clarity. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. The legendary samurai Miyamoto Musashi fought over 60 duels. He never lost, and in many of them he won before the sword was even drawn. How? By mastering tension. He would arrive late. He would remain silent. He would stare his opponent down, calm, unreadable, untouched. And in that unbearable silence, his opponents would begin to unravel. Some became angry. Some panicked. Some attacked impulsively. But Musashi? He withheld. And in doing so, he dictated the entire encounter. This is the power of strategic silence. It puts pressure on others to fill the void, to act, to explain, to reveal themselves. And while they do, you watch, you learn, you wait, until the moment comes, and your action is final, precise, undeniable, in a world obsessed with reaction, broadcasting, and noise. Withholding is rebellion, a quiet, deliberate rebellion, and those who learn to wield it become something rare, something unsettling, because when people can't predict you, can't read you, can't provoke you, they don't feel in control, and that right there is the deepest form of intimidation, because the world can handle aggression, it can handle loud threats, it can even handle cruelty, But what it cannot handle, what it cannot understand, is the person who feels nothing, shows nothing, and still wins. So hold your reaction, hold your expression, hold your explanation. Let others spill their emotions onto the floor, and while they do, stand still. Because true dominance isn't in how much you say, it's in how little you need to. They say a warrior's power is measured in blood, in brute strength, in force. But the ancient Stoics knew better. Power, real power, is measured in presence, in how you carry yourself when everyone else is losing control. This isn't about swinging a sword, it's about becoming the kind of man who makes others pause before you've said a word, before you've even moved, the kind of man whose presence speaks louder than threats ever could. This is the Stoic warrior presence. Let's start with the body, because before you ever speak, before you ever act, your posture, your movement, your stillness is already communicating everything. And the question is, what are you telling the world? Most people leak energy everywhere. They fidget, they slouch, their eyes dart around trying to scan for approval. They shift when challenged, laugh too quickly, speak too fast. But the Stoic, he doesn't seek approval. He doesn't chase comfort. He stands tall, deliberate, controlled. He moves like every motion has weight, because it does, and that weight is felt by everyone around him. Roman soldiers were trained to endure hardship without complaint, to move only when commanded, to fight with precision, not emotion, and that discipline carried into every inch of their presence. Even off the battlefield, they projected strength, not by flexing it, but by containing it. They knew the truth. That stillness is more threatening than noise. That silence leaves more to the imagination, and that a man who is still is a man who is ready. Now let's step into the most volatile arena of all: conflict. Most people enter conflict like wild animals, raised voices, finger-pointing, explanations, defensive reactions. They think that whoever talks fastest wins. But the Stoic, he stays quiet. And in that quiet, something begins to happen. Everyone else is exposing themselves, their insecurities, their fears, their desperation to be right. But the one who says nothing, he says everything. He becomes the center of gravity in the room, not because he demands attention, but because he doesn't. And people feel it. They wonder, why isn't he arguing? Why isn't he afraid? What does he know that we don't? In that moment, silence becomes a sword. It disarms, it provokes, it pressures the others to break first. There's a scene you'll never find written in Stoic texts, but it's been passed down through fragments of Roman political history. A bitter debate in the Senate, Julius Caesar rising, accusing, shifting power. And across from him, seated with arms folded, Cato the Younger. Cato, the Stoic, did not speak. He did not stand. He stared at Caesar, calmly, coldly, unmoved. No threats, no insults, not even a retort, just silence. Contemptuous silence. The kind that says, I don't need to destroy you, you'll destroy yourself. Now we reach the pinnacle. Not anger, not pride, not dominance, but by indifference. In a world where everyone is chasing something, status, reputation, likes, validation, indifference is power. Because the man who doesn't care what you think, who isn't trying to impress you, who isn't afraid to walk away, that man is terrifying. Because he's not bound by the same rules. And no one knows how to control someone who doesn't need anything from them. Cato never flattered Caesar, never bent to the tide of politics. He never shouted in protest. He didn't need to. His silence in the face of corruption was louder than any speech, and that silence became his legacy. When you project indifference, you tell the world one thing: you don't control me. Not your approval, not your attacks, not your rewards. Nothing. And when people realize that, when they realize you are a closed door they cannot unlock, that's when the fear begins. Because people fear what they can't influence. So how do you become that presence? You slow down, you still your body, you hold your gaze, you learn to be quiet in chaos, you resist the urge to be understood, to be liked, to be admired, and in that resistance you become untouchable. Because a man who masters his presence, who walks without explaining, listens without defending, and stands without moving, that man doesn't need to be feared. He already is. There are men whose names echo through history, not because they were loud, not because they demanded respect, but because they commanded it. Through presence, through restraint, through silence backed by immense power. They weren't fearless because they had nothing to lose. They were fearless because they had already conquered the one thing most never do: themselves. These are the masters of Stoic power. And if you want to be dangerous without saying a word, you must understand how they thought, how they held themselves, and why their enemies feared them, often without a single threat being spoken. Let's begin with the philosopher king. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire during one of its most chaotic periods. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was a general, a strategist, a man surrounded by betrayal, war, and plague. And yet, every night, after commanding armies, after settling disputes, after burying his children, he would return to his tent and write, not to anyone else, but to himself. Those writings became meditations. A raw private journal never meant for publication, not filled with boasts, not military victories, but reminders. Reminders to stay calm, to not give in to rage, to not desire praise, to not be owned by pleasure or fear. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus understood something timeless. If you can remain still while everything around you burns, you become more than a man. You become an anchor, a fixed point in a world that's constantly trying to pull people off center. His enemies didn't fear his words. They feared that they couldn't provoke him. They feared a man they couldn't manipulate, because no matter how much power he had, he never needed to show it. And that, in itself, was the power. Now we go to the other end of society, to a man who owned nothing, not even himself. Epictetus. Born into slavery, crippled, mistreated, stripped of dignity, status, and freedom, and yet he was one of the most powerful men in Rome. Why? Because his mind could not be chained, no matter what was done to his body. He chose how to interpret it. One story says his master twisted his leg out of place, torturing him. And Epictetus, calm, told him, "If you continue, you will break it." The master continued. The leg snapped. And Epictetus said only this, "I warned you. No screaming, no pleading, no hatred, just observation. Just truth." It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. In a society obsessed with status and displays of force, Epictetus showed that the only real power is internal. He taught in small, quiet rooms, to men who came to listen, not to a king, but to a former slave who had mastered life more than any emperor they'd met. And his legacy still survives, because real authority doesn't shout, it doesn't flash, it simply is. Travel east, centuries later, Japan. Miyamoto Musashi. Now, samurai, swordmaster, strategist, undefeated in over 60 duels, some of which ended before a blade was drawn. But Musashi's real genius wasn't just his technique, it was his mindset. He lived like a monk, ate almost nothing, slept with his weapon, traveled alone, even when he was world-renowned. But it was his presence in combat that made him legendary. He would arrive late, walk slowly, say nothing, and stand still, while his opponent fidgeted, panicked, tried to read him. Musashi once wrote, "Appear at ease when you are alert. Seem outwardly stupid when inwardly intelligent." His duels were psychological before they were physical. He understood what modern men still struggle to grasp, that anticipation is fear. And if you can control the space between what your opponent expects and what you actually do, you control everything. His silence, his minimal movement, his unpredictability. These were not accidents. They were tools, weapons, mastered with precision, and in that silence, many opponents lost before the first strike. Let's now enter the world of generals, men who led nations, men whose words moved armies, but whose silence created legends. First, Napoleon Bonaparte. He had a gift, not just in war, but in presence. He could stand in a room of rival generals, many taller, older, more decorated, and yet all eyes fell on him. He didn't interrupt, he didn't defend every criticism. He waited, observed, calculated, and when he finally spoke, it was calm, sharp, decisive. He once said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he is making a mistake." His genius wasn't just in action, it was in restraint, in using silence as a trap, a test. He knew that those who react too quickly reveal too much. And then there's George Washington, the first president, the reluctant general. He wasn't loud, he didn't crave the spotlight, but when he walked into a room, men stood straighter. He understood the psychological power of minimal speech. Letters from the era describe how he'd listen without expression, speak only when necessary, and end meetings early, leaving people to wonder what he was thinking. Washington rarely showed emotion in public, not because he was cold, but because he knew that every expression was currency, and he spent it sparingly, from Roman emperors to broken slaves, from sword saints to battlefield architects. The lesson is the same. Power doesn't roar. It waits. It watches. And then it moves, only once, with absolute force. So the next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, to react, to impress, stop and remember Marcus and Epictetus and Musashi and Washington. They didn't move quickly. They didn't reveal themselves. They didn't let the world decide their value. They knew who they were, and in that knowing, they became immovable. They didn't speak loudly, because they didn't need to. The world watched them in silence, and still does. You've heard the history, you've seen the masters, but knowing about power is not the same as having it. The next step is harder, quieter, invisible to most, because it happens in silence, inside you. This is not a motivational list. This is a blueprint, not to look composed, but to be composed. Let's begin. The day doesn't begin when you leave your house. It begins in your head. Before the world has a chance to tell you who you are, you must tell yourself. 1. Morning Stoic meditation. No affirmations, no fantasy visualizations, just one question. What will I not control today? Traffic, other people's opinions, unfair criticism, delayed results. A Stoic meditates on adversity before it comes, so that when it does, it feels like déjà vu, expected, already handled. 2. Journaling without self-pity. Write, but not to complain. Write to clarify. No why me, only what now. Journaling isn't therapy, it's training, a space to detect your own illusions before they distort your behavior. If your thinking is emotional, you write it. If it's reactive, you write it, and then you erase the lies. 3. Cold exposure and breath work. You don't need a reason, no magic, just this. When you train yourself to breathe through shock, you become harder to rattle. Cold water isn't a hack, it's a teacher. It tells your nervous system, yes, we're in pain, but no, we're not running. That signal, that message to your body that discomfort is not death. It builds the kind of stillness no affirmation ever could. This is not self-care, it's self-conditioning, and it works. Let's be clear, composure is not natural, it is not passive, it is trained, and it obeys rules. Rule 1, don't explain, let them wonder. If someone misunderstands you, let them. The need to clarify is usually fear disguised as logic. Silence invites respect. Over-explanation invites suspicion. Let people talk. Let them assume. Let them be confused. Mystery builds gravity, and gravity pulls power toward you. Rule 2. Let insults pass like wind. If a gust of wind hits your face, do you insult it back? No, you blink. You walk forward. The same with words. When someone tries to provoke you, they're trying to move you, control you. You kill that power by not responding. Rule 3. Show no emotional highs or lows. Excitement is a leak, so is outrage, so is panic. When you react, you advertise your pressure points, but when your emotional line is flat, your enemies don't know if you're winning or losing, and that uncertainty is terrifying. Rule 4. Speak less, watch more. The less you speak, the more they fill in the blanks. The more they speak, the more they reveal themselves. Talking is easy. Watching is discipline. Watch reactions, micro-expressions, tone shifts. You learn more in silence than most do in conversation. Rule 5. Never threaten. Only act if necessary. Words are cheap. Threats are weaker than silence. The most feared man in the room is the one who could destroy you, but never says it. He just might, and that's enough. These are the laws. Break them, and you become noisy, predictable, weak. Follow them, and you become unreadable, unmovable, a walking mystery with power behind your eyes. Let's go deeper. You can practice techniques, you can quote Stoics, but if your life doesn't reflect intentional silence, none of it sticks. What you need is a frame, a silent one, a posture, an energy, a presence that says, I don't chase, I don't need, I don't flinch. This isn't about aesthetic, it's about discipline. Start with minimalism, not the trendy kind, the strategic kind. You don't wear flashy brands, you don't show off your tech, you don't decorate your identity with noise, because power doesn't signal, it watches. Your silence begins with your space, then your habits, which leads to strategic isolation. This doesn't mean being lonely, it means being intentional. You don't give access to everyone, you're not always online, you don't always respond, because when you're always available, you become common. And finally, ruthless consistency. What you say, you do, every day. No shortcuts, no hype. This is how you build reputation without trying. Not from your words, but from your rhythm. You don't need to convince people of who you are. You show up again and again and again until the room adjusts to your presence, not the other way around. Here's the part no one wants to hear. Reputation is not real. It is an illusion, a reflection in water, and the more you reach for it, the less you can hold yourself. But if you want to be feared, truly feared, you must let it go. The man who doesn't need to be liked, who doesn't fear being misunderstood, who lets rumors spread like smoke because he knows what cannot be touched. That man terrifies people. Because he is unpredictable, unbound, he doesn't blink, he doesn't adjust. He lives by a code that can't be negotiated. Let me give you an example, a modern one. In 2018, Elon Musk faced one of the worst PR storms of his career. The press declared him unstable. Shareholders begged him to stop tweeting. They warned that his reputation was at risk, that he was ruining his image. And what did he do? He tweeted, "I'm not here to be liked." While billions were on the line, he laughed at short sellers. He mocked the media. He said he'd rather die than sell out. Now, agree or disagree with him, that's not the point. The point is this: he didn't care what you thought. And because of that, no one could touch him. When you're indifferent to reputation, your enemies don't know how to harm you. They don't know what you value. They don't know what buttons to press. You become invisible where it counts, unreachable, unaffected. And here's the paradox. When you stop chasing reputation, you gain the only one that matters. A quiet one, a dangerous one, the reputation of a man who cannot be controlled. This is the silent strategy. It's not loud, it's not viral, it's not popular, but it works. Because in a world where everyone's screaming for attention, the man who stays quiet becomes unforgettable. So far, we've been in the abstract: philosophy, discipline, internal war, but philosophy means nothing if it cannot be applied. This is where the code is tested, not in the mountain cave, but in the modern world, where people overtalk, overshare, and overreact, because that's how they've been trained to survive. But the silent man does the opposite, and in doing so, becomes unforgettable. In a workplace, most people are noise. They chase visibility. They oversell their ideas. They interrupt to look confident. They brag after every win and panic after every loss. But there's one man in the room who doesn't play the game. He doesn't talk just to be seen. He speaks when he must. And when he does, the room listens. Why? Because silence builds value. Scarcity creates weight. When you don't rush to speak, people assume you must be thinking, and they respect what they assume. This is leadership presence, without the title. When gossip circles the office, you don't participate. When someone tries to provoke you in a meeting, you keep a straight face. When your idea is stolen, you don't whine. You wait, you adapt, you let results speak later. People notice, they whisper, "He's hard to read. He doesn't crack. He's solid." And that reputation becomes armor, because the loudest people win attention, but the quietest win control. Here's the truth. In a sea of reactive employees, the man who shows no urgency becomes the leader, even if he's the lowest in rank. Why? Because everyone else is waiting to be told what to do, but you look like you already know. In social situations, silence is often mistaken for awkwardness. Let them think that, because in reality, silence is power, especially when it's intentional. Power in withdrawal. You don't chase. You don't follow up 3 times. You don't panic if someone leaves you on red. You disappear quietly and let your absence do the talking. This isn't manipulation. It's discipline. Because here's what no one tells you. People respect distance more than desperation. Letting others fill the silence. Most people fear pauses in conversation, so they fill them with noise, with jokes, with over-explanations. But if you sit in that silence, still, calm, unbothered, they begin to fill the gap. And when someone talks too much, they give away their insecurities, their need for approval, their thoughts, Before they're ready, you say less, they reveal more. You become the unknown variable. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how you feel. They don't know if you care. That makes you unpredictable, and unpredictability is power, because when people can't label you, they become cautious, polite, careful. Your silence becomes presence, and presence becomes magnetism. Let's talk about the real battlefield now. The digital world. This is where Stoicism dies for most, not on the streets, but in their pockets. Every day you leak power through tiny actions. You respond to every DM, you post stories hoping they see it. You subtweet your emotions, you share your wins too early and your losses too often. You think you're expressing yourself, but you're really broadcasting your nervous system. You're training people to read you, to track your highs and lows, to measure how much attention you need and how quickly you respond. And that's not Stoicism, that's digital dependence. The Stoic of this era is rare, but you can be one. Start here. Don't post, not often. You're not a product. Let people wonder where you are. Let them wonder how you're doing. Let them miss your voice before you offer it. Don't react. Someone posts a shot at you, ignore it. Someone you dated moved on, congratulate them. In silence. Someone calls you out publicly, only respond if it's tactically necessary. Most people react digitally because they can't stand emotional dissonance. But your job is to endure that dissonance. Let it burn. Let it swirl around you without pulling you in. Remove digital emotion leakage. That means no vague story posts, no "look what I'm doing" updates, no status begging for attention, because you don't need to be seen. That's why you're powerful. Let me show you what this looks like through someone you know. Kendrick Lamar is a ghost until he isn't. He vanishes for months, sometimes years. No tweets, no press, no explanations. Then, one day, he drops a verse, a poem, an album, and the world listens. Why? Because he doesn't always speak, which makes his voice rare, which makes it sacred. He never leaks emotion online. He doesn't flex, he doesn't chase likes, he doesn't defend himself. And yet, he's one of the most respected, influential voices alive, because his silence is earned and it's strategic. You see, Kendrick knows that in a noisy world, silence becomes the signal. You can do the same. You don't need a platform. You don't need millions. You just need discipline. No status updates, no public arguments, no subtle cries for validation, just presence, offline, unshaken. You don't beg for attention. You build gravity. Because if people never quite know what you're thinking, you become powerful. If they never know what you'll say next, you become unpredictable. And if they never know if you even care, you become dangerous. This is the modern Stoic. He doesn't shout. He doesn't signal. He doesn't react. He holds the line and lets the world adjust. So now you've seen what real power looks like. Not the kind that screams, not the kind that postures, not the kind that tries to impress, but the kind that waits, that listens, that controls itself so completely it terrifies everyone around it. The Stoic doesn't need attention. He doesn't need validation. He doesn't even need to speak. He becomes feared because no one can tell what he's thinking, because his silence is too perfect to be weakness, because even in chaos he does not move. Every time you hold back, every time you don't explain yourself, every time you let someone try to read you and fail, you're reminding the world of one thing, that you don't owe them anything. Not a reaction, not an emotion, not a single word. They whisper because they don't understand you. They avoid you because they can't predict you. And they fear you because they know if you ever decide to act, you'll do it without hesitation, without warning, without noise. Let them raise their voice. Let them fight to be seen. Let them burn themselves out, proving their power. You already know. The one who doesn't react, the one who doesn't flinch, the one who doesn't need to be known, that's the one they're really afraid of. Look back through history. The greatest minds, the greatest threats, weren't the loudest in the room. They were the ones everyone watched. Because they said nothing, because silence isn't the absence of power, it's the presence of mastery. When you speak less, people listen more. When you hold still, people notice. And when you don't react, you seize control of the moment. And that's all it takes. Not rage, not chaos, not shouting, just stillness, just presence, just the discipline to be unmoved. If they can't read you, they can't control you, and if they can't control you, they fear you, because your restraint is foreign to them. Your calm is unsettling. Your silence is louder than their shouting ever was. So now the question is, what will you do with this? Will you walk away from this video, go back to being loud, reactive, predictable, or will you change? Will you commit to the path that few have the strength to walk? The path of the silent, the focused, the unshakable, the one they never see coming. Let this video be your turning point. Start with small acts of silence. Don't respond to that insult. Don't explain your plan. Don't flinch when they test you. They will test you because they're afraid of losing the control they never really had. Let them try. You won't move. You don't need to be feared by force. You become feared because nothing rattles you. You become feared because you see everything but say nothing. And that is power. If this resonated with you, if this isn't just theory, but a fire now lit inside your chest, then don't let this be the end. Subscribe. Subscribe because the world is loud, and you need reminders to stay quiet. Subscribe because the discipline of silence must be practiced, refined, perfected. Subscribe because you're not just here to consume, you're here to transform. This channel isn't for everyone. It's not for those who need to be entertained. It's not for the easily offended. It's not for the loud. It's for the ones who've chosen mastery of thought, of emotion, of power. So if you've chosen that path, subscribe and become the one they never see coming.